As much as I love a game which takes a core idea and runs with it to perfection, I also love those which try to do something more. These days, it mostly means including little subgames or whatnot. But during the 8-bit days, it usually led to multiple modes of play. It's something I feel it's become a bit of a trope, at least for those days, especially when you look at the formula that Ocean would apply to just about every movie tie-in they did. But I strongly feel there's one game which nailed the idea, and that's Llamasoft's Batalyx, released on the Commodore 64 in 1985. It not only squeezed 6 unique game modes into a single load, but it also demonstrates peak 8-bit Minter mayhem. With the way it all works, I can't help but feel a breakdown of the subgames is necessary to really sum this one up. But before that, there's really a story to it that seems a fair enough place to start. Obviously, we are talking about an 8-bit computer game here with Batalyx, so it's not a full-on epic in terms of its story, but in a strangely relevant for space year 2025 kind of way, it just so happens to be set in the galaxy ruled by the heinous Xiaxian Empire, the main villains behind many of the earlier games that Llamasoft put out. At long last, a rebel force made up of those who are still free have managed to come together with a plan to take out the Xiaxians' base of operations, the world of Xiax Prime. And they're going to do this by reactivating a trio of dormant structures left behind by the planet's previous occupants. The first is reactivating Iridis base, a mystical structure that can direct streams of photon energy. Secondly, synchronizing the 8 levels of the great psionic generator of Dio, which apparently gets you a really neat bonus. Finally, reactivating the Mega Tap Psionic Power Wave Guide Channel, or Great Corridor. The mission isn't just about this trio of objectives, as the Xiaxians have got a bunch of defences in place too, consisting of defences both in orbit and on the ground which have to be taken care of to allow those main objectives to be secured. Where you as a player come into the picture is that you're one of a group of PsyOps who are linked to members of this task force. And the key thing here is they've got the ability to shift between different members at any point. In other words, you can be an operator piloting one of the drones attacking the defences before diving into another member to tackle one of those prime objectives. And this keys into the core objective of Batalyx, and it's about mastering the subgames, well, the 5 main playable subgames, and earning a completion token by doing various things. But more importantly, it's about beating the clock. This game is against the clock rather than having a set number of lives. And how all of this works, I will touch on later once we've walked through each of the subgames. First up, we've got Hallucin-O-Bomblets, which is the orbital attack mission, taking place above Xiax Prime. At first glance, you might think it's Robotron-esque, a twin-stick shooter, but the controls are really where this one gets very unique, as pushing the joystick about fires a shot from your droid in that given direction. But, thanks to the power of physics, you will be pushed in the opposite direction. Push the stick left, you'll fire left, but you'll be pushed right. Thus, this one becomes a game of balance. You need to be aiming shots at the enemies in order to take them out and earn points and work towards the objective, but at the same time, you have to control your thrust, modulate its use, so you don't crash into enemies. And this balance is really key to this game. Each enemy drone you blast will add a point to your status meter. You can see this is the increasing purple dots at the bottom. But if you collide into one, you will lose several points as a result. Now, if you fill the bar up, you'll earn 1/2 of the completion token. So yes, you have to do 2 full passes of it to get that full token and complete this phase. Hallucin-O-Bomblets is probably one of my favourite of the Batalyx subgames. I've always loved Jeff's blasting style that he's always done, especially in the 8-bit days where it's a little more rawer. And there is something different in how things are done here. Even in other games, things like the multiple cannons in Laser Zone or Hellgate, or the influence of gravity, like you get in Sheep in Space. So with this subgame, having your movement impacted by your shooting truly shakes things up, and some of the waves you encounter do offer challenge, especially as they progress, in that, you have to think on your toes constantly how to best move your ship about to clean up those waves without losing too many hits in the process. It's one for those who really love a shooter and might want to try something very distinct. The other defensive operation comes in the form of AMC2. That's right, we get a throwback as a follow-up to the classic Attack of the Mutant Camels, with a few years of technical catch-up showing that the Commodore 64 is as capable of camel blasting as its Atari 8-bit counterpart. The formula is unsurprisingly pretty simple. Clear out wave after wave of camels before you walk onto the next. There is one adjustment here to fit within the wider Batalyx system, and that's where if a camel reached the far right of the map in the original game, it was over. But instead here, an extra one is added to the tally that you need to destroy on a given level. AMC2 is certainly much tougher compared to the original game. The camels here are much smaller, much more agile, and more heavily armed than their counterparts in that original game. And plus, you'll have to deal with 3 on screen at once, so you'll be doing far more dodging about with enemy fire as well. Yeah, you're certainly not going to be waiting about to dodge those shots here, as you did in the original game. You've got to be on your toes all the time. It also helps that your fighter is able to take far more damage in comparison. And that helps with later waves, because you could be fighting up to 16 camels to clear or more in order to move on. But of course, if you do get blasted, you get bumped back to the previous wave, where you could carry on the fight again. Now, what about the completion token? I'm sure you're asking. It's pretty easy here, because all you have to do is clear out 4 separate stages. Now, specifically, you can't just replay like the first wave 4 times. No, you can't do that. What you have to do is clear out wave 0, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. Or so on, any 4 waves. You could skip a wave if you're frustrated, but as long as you clear out 4 unique waves, you'll get your completion token. And then, and admittedly, some of those later waves are pretty tough when there's so many camels you have to deal with. But that's part of the challenge here, and it's great. I love the original Attack of the Mutant Camels. I still enjoy throwing it on for a quick blast every now and then. And likewise with Batalyx, there are plenty of times I might just load it up and have it run at AMC2, because it's just such a great update to a classic. And still get plenty of thrills out of zapping hostile camels. Now we're on to the first of the more unique subgames, starting with the third one, the activation of Iridis base. If you're looking at this screen at first glance, it kind of looks a bit complex, but once you get a bit of an understanding, it's not so bad at all. Essentially, what we've got here is a Simon-style experience. You can see there's a little 3x3 grid off to the side of your view, and this lights up indicating a direction that you need to push on the joystick. Those 8 outer squares is the direction. The middle button is that direction has to be pressed with the fire button. Now that sounds simple enough, but it's the floors and getting a grip of them which is a bit of a challenge. You have a number of shots in order to get this sequence. Apparently it's 100 steps you have to input, and if you miss a step, you'll lose one of those glowing orbs that are flying ahead of you. Those, supposedly they're supposed to give you pointers, and I trust the instruction on this front, but I've never really been able to understand that. I've always relied on the inputs indicator. And you want to keep as many of these orbs alive as possible, because when you complete the sequence and light up Iridis base based on the number you've got. So if you manage to keep them all together, you can do it in one pass, and that's great for speed, which, again, we'll cover later. Lighting up all of the base gives you your completion token, so, if you're really good at it, you can master that. Now, it's a simpler kind of subgame compared to those first two. It's, you're just basically pushing the stick in a given direction, not having to get frantically zapping. And when I got into this game as a kid, I never really clicked with this particular subgame. I struggled trying to get those patterns. But as I come back to it now, 30 odd years after I first played it, and even with the setup of a capture rig and all of that, I actually managed to have a decent time working my way through it. Not 100%, I still messed up a fair few times, especially those where you're doing a direction with fire, but I still could beat it. Now, I guess out of all the subgames in Batalyx, I think this is the one that's truly going to test how well your setup deals with lag. I mean, if you're still rocking an original C64 and original monitor to put it on, you're going to be in the best setup here. But if you're running an emulator, you're using hardware through upscalers and on modern displays, this is going to be the real test of it, because you need to be able to put those things through. So it's also an interesting kind of thing to use to test that. The fourth of the subgames in Batalyx for me is probably the most surreal of them all, Cippy on the Run, which features a return of the beasts from Cippy doing their part in the Grey Corridor. The idea is simply to walk over every section on both the upper and lower surfaces. Doing this will activate them, they'll start cycling about in a rainbow colour sequence. While this happens, of course, you'll be assaulted by hostile spheres, which you can blast as they close in with the projectiles that get spewed from Cippy's mouth. Actually colliding with these spheres won't do anything, which is actually a bit of a relief. And you want to be taking those spheres out before they hit the surfaces, as once they spawn in, they'll bounce around and they'll hit parts of the Grey Corridor. If they hit a section that you haven't touched, they will colour it their own way, and they will warp, introduce an effect that can do various little things. Sometimes it's harmless, it'll just flip Cippy onto the other surface, or cause him to jump. Other times you might get disoriented or warp to another part of the corridor. And it can be a frenetic kind of challenge, especially once Cippy gets up to speed. Blasting those spheres, dodging the traps that you have to jump over or shift between surfaces from, can be challenging, especially when you've got to learn the timing to get over those gaps. You want to be able to get over them without having to do a double flip, because it's faster and you can preserve your speed, and that helps you clear it out faster. And of course, if you're not careful, some of the later stages, you might accidentally walk over a section you've already done, and you deactivate it, so you'll have to go back over it again. So you've got to be really careful, and your eyes on the scanner at the bottom can be really helpful in making sure you know what you've done and what you've got left to do to beat a stage. But as for the completion token, it's pretty straightforward here. All you have to do is complete 4 levels. Every level you complete results in 1 quarter being displayed, so once you've cleared the 4th, you're good. It's not like AMC2 where you had to complete 4 unique levels, but then again here, if you do die and hit one of those traps, you just restart the one you're on. You're not bumped back to a previous stage. That doesn't include the bonus stages. After you beat every 2 stages, you do get a little bonus sequence where there's no enemies and you simply have to do the run as fast as you can and activate everything. Without falling into the trap sections, of course. So Cippy on the Run is another one of those subgames that I feel is very different to the normal kind of Llamasoft thing. Sure, you get the Ancipitals back here, but it simplifies the controls and movement of that game, and gives you enough challenge by just having to avoid enemy traps and those regions which have been hit by the enemy spheres, in order to keep that pace moving really frantically. It's a fun one to dive in and just see what you can do in that time. It's pretty fun, it's pretty challenging, and very frenetic in a different way compared to the Llamasoft formula. Synchro II is the last of the main subgames in Batalyx. I'll explain that shortly. And once again, it's one that provides something quite a bit different from other Llamasoft projects. The goal in each of the levels is to stop the spheres from moving, and you do this by controlling the speed of coloured tiles. Each tile that is of a given colour is linked to all the other tiles, so you select it with the joystick, hold fire and push a direction, and you'll slide it about. And you use this to basically get tiles moving in the opposite direction to a sphere. That makes sense, right? So if you've got a sphere bouncing to the southeast, you want to move a tile to the northwest in terms of its movement, and then the sphere going over it will be stopped. Now, there could be potential side effects to the other spheres by doing this. So if you're not careful, you might propel one in an uncontrollable way by stopping one. And on top of that, if you stop a sphere, it's not permanent. After a short period of time, they will start moving again, so you've really got to be thoughtful and precise in how you stop a sphere so that you can quickly stop the others on a stage. The way that there's this thought and pattern recognition to puzzle your way through really makes this one quite an interesting challenge. It's very fiddly to understand at first, but I think once you understand it, it's just a way of making sure, working out the vectors to stop them later on. And that, of course, gets a little harder, as some of the tiles that you have under your control are invisible, so you can't actually see them animating. And that's certainly enough to throw you under the bus if you're not ready for it. Synchro II also is quite distinctive on an audio front. The other subgames in Batalyx usually rely on sound effects to do their thing, to provide, to fill the scape up as you're playing with everything. In Synchro II, there's this degree of generative soundtrack in play. It's influenced by which blocks you have active and what you're selected. It's kind of neat. It's tough to get used to it. It can sound really harsh at first, but I feel it contributes to making the environment that bit more weird and a bit more strange, and kind of helps the vibe overall here. Now, as for that completion token, obviously there are 8 levels you need to clear, and once you've cleared all 8, you've got that completion token in the bag. Now, it could certainly be tricky doing it. I have to admit, I struggled a fair bit replaying this subgame when playing it. I had to go back and do a separate run as early as possible so I could have a decent shot at it. Now, this is one I don't really go back to all that often. Much like the activation of Iridis base, it's one where the challenge is a little too much for me in sort of the way I normally want to relax playing. But that doesn't rule out the fact that Synchro II is still a really unique subgame. It offers a very odd challenge, one that really will tax your brain, but it's a very cool kind of challenge and a great addition to subgames of Batalyx. Earlier on I said there were 6 subgames, and only 5 of those are actually required to complete Batalyx. The 6th is Pause Mode, and it's basically a cut-down version of Psychedelia, the first of the Llamasoft light synth projects. It's great. You pause the game, the main timer stops, you get to just mess about and draw pretty patterns for a moment and just zone out away from the main game. It was definitely the first of these projects I ever saw, and I think it's pretty neat. There's not a lot in terms of options, you can adjust symmetry, colours, background colours and whatnot, and it gives you a taste of what the wider projects are. You can't really expect to have something as complex as the full Psychedelia or colour space here. But I think it's kind of cute. It's a nice little treat for the senses when you put the controller down for a moment and have a chill while you catch your breath before going back to the fight against the Xiaxians. So that's all of the 6 subgames that make up Batalyx as a game. And it's time to assemble a bigger picture by reflecting on the Batalyx game system. And this is where the genius of Batalyx comes into play for me. Because it's not that the subgames themselves aren't ingenious in various ways. Rather, it's how they're all used. The first part of this is the difficulty level. On the tile screen before starting, you can set the difficulty level from 1 to 5. The lower the difficulty, the more time you get in playing through the game. Now, itself, that's not that special. That's kind of cool. But it just sets up the first part here. As the clock ticks down, and that's that big, long rainbow strip, you can see that. You'll see that throughout the game. As that ticks down, Batalyx will start to become more challenging. Now, admittedly, this is more obvious in action with the more action-based subgames like Hallucin-O-Bomblets and AMC2. The attacks in AMC2 get far more frantic and far more deadly, while the Hallucin-O-Bomblets throws more challenging patterns at you. But the other subgames do have subtle challenges as well, and learning those can be quite tricky. And this, I think, is brilliant, because it's a cool way to handle adaptive difficulty, and it also really plays into your strategy as a player. When you start a run, do you want to go for those subgames you're not good at, I'm always crap at Iridis base and Synchro II. Do I try to tackle them first when the game is easier, so that I can get them out of the way and move on to those I do find easier, and could deal with at a higher difficulty level? Or what about the other way? Why don't I start clearing out Bomblets or AMC2, get them out of the way quickly because they're easier for me, and then I've got more time to spend, even if the game's harder, taking on those tougher subgames. And of course, as part of the meta-narrative of Batalyx, there is no penalty to change subgames at any time. You know, you're being this operator that's linked to all these characters in game, and you can just hit the number keys and switch. And Batalyx will remember exactly where you were in each subgame. You know, you might start a subgame, switch over, and come back. And it remembers it. It's exactly where you left off. It just updates based on the new difficulty when you come back. And I think it's a masterful stroke. I think this really might not seem like much if you're playing a game written in 2025 on hardware of 2025, you know, a high-end PC or a console, whatever. But on a C64 some 40 years ago, I think it's really neat to just see this game system be able to manage the state of these 5 game modes independently and let you switch back as necessary. And it also conveys in with, again, the story of the game and these operators. You know, you're dealing with this battle over multiple fronts at once, and I can't really think of many games that have ever tried to do something like that within their story. I mean, maybe Atari's Return of the Jedi arcade game? You know, where that and some of the stages had you switching, but the way it did that was fairly clumsy in comparison to what you've got under user control here. I think it just makes Batalyx feel incredibly special for that alone. It's like 40 years since Batalyx has come out on the C64. And I think that some of you might think that these subgames in themselves aren't really that impressive now. But as a whole package, I think this one is not only an example of peak 8-bit Llamasoft, but it really shows that inventiveness you get from gaming on 8-bit home computers, when you're unencumbered by licenses or the need to target a budget price point. You get that room to explore and innovate and do weird stuff. Batalyx offers some frantic action, whether it's blasting a delightful assortment of enemies in Bomblets, challenging your reactions in the activation of Iridis base, or puzzling out the right way to stop those spheres in Synchro II. Each subgame brings something to the table that'll test you as a player, regardless of whether you want to go for a top score by trying to do as best as you can in each subgames, go for those completion tokens, or just want to play your favourite subgame for a session. Batalyx gives you an impressive amount of freedom to let you just do what you want. And that really, for me, makes it stand out pretty darn high in the Commodore 64's library. Now, of course, you know, in my ideal world, you'd all play this on original hardware, on original screens, but realistically, that's not an option for everyone, and thankfully, in Spacey 2025, if you're not willing to run a 64 emulator, you can, of course, get a hold of Digital Eclipse's interactive documentary, Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, which has Batalyx included as one of the games you can play and learn a bit about. There is a catch though, of course, and as I pointed out in my original video on it, it doesn't allow you to switch in-game. You have to exit out subgames. So you won't be able to play that part of Batalyx, but you can at least experience the subgames and do an individual run on each. I think that's pretty cool, especially because it lets you play them on easy mode, but I think you do lose something in not seeing the status bar completion icons come up if you want to work your way through it. It's a simple reward, sure, but it's quite an important one, at least in my book. But with that, I think it's time to draw this one to a close. As always, if you enjoyed the video, it would mean a lot if you did the things, you know, give it a thumbs up, give Batalyx a play, and let's talk about it in the comments. You know, there's more than nostalgia here. I think this is an actual cool slice of 8-bit gaming history. And tell your friends. There are a lot of things you can do to support an independent creator like myself here. A bunch of that stuff's in the description, supporting the show on Patreon. Just letting your friends know, recommending it. Like, if you've got friends who like weird old games, this is one that's really cool and worth talking about. But all it really leaves me to say right now is to just thank you very much for watching.